In July of 1996, the Colton family rented a cottage on the Texas Gulf Coast for their summer vacation. They checked in on a Saturday afternoon. By Sunday morning, they were gone. No sign of a struggle. The house was locked from the inside. Their belongings were left behind. Wallets, shoes, even the father's car key sitting neatly on the counter. For 27 years, no one has been able to answer the same question. What happened inside the locked beach house? Tonight, we open the case file again. If you're drawn to stories of unsolved mysteries and chilling disappearances, don't forget to subscribe. The ocean was calm that night, unnervingly so. Neighbors along Windward Lane, a narrow strip of rental cottages edging the dunes, recalled later how the air felt heavy, as though the Gulf itself was holding its breath. The Colton's cottage, number 7, was lit warmly from within. A beach towel fluttered lazily from the porch railing. A citronella candle smoldered on the deck table, and soft laughter drifted through the salt air. By morning, silence. At 8:15 a.m., a cleaner hired by the rental agency arrived to tidy up after the family's first night. She found the sliding glass door locked from the inside. Curtains drawn. Car parked out front. Knocking brought no answer. When she finally used her passcode to enter, the cottage looked lived in. 4 bowls of cereal half-eaten at the table, a Monopoly game abandoned mid-play. 2 beach chairs still sandy by the door. Upstairs, beds unmade. In the bathroom, damp towels hung over the rail. But the family of 4, Daniel and Marissa Colton, and their children, 11-year-old Kayla and 7-year-old Peter, were gone. No footprints leading away in the sand. No sign of forced entry. Nothing but absence, locked behind glass. The case would consume investigators, splinter neighbors, and haunt a town that preferred its shadows buried. And 27 years later, it would all come rushing back. The year the Coltons vanished, Abby Weaver was 14 years old. She had been the one, standing barefoot in the wet sand that morning, watching as police cars crawled onto Windward Lane. She remembered how surreal it looked. Those flashing blue lights against pastel-painted cottages, against surfboards propped against porches. Now, decades later, she was returning. The drive down from Austin was longer than she remembered. Highway 71 gave way to flat coastal grasslands, where herds of cattle grazed under the endless blue dome of Texas sky. She hadn't been back in nearly 15 years. Not since she left for college and swore she'd never again be swallowed by the same town where her childhood friends had vanished in the night. But now, at 37, she had agreed to a feature article. Cold Coast, Unsolved Disappearances of the Gulf. It was supposed to be her professional comeback. One more investigative piece after years of freelance stagnation. Abby tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the salt air thickened, announcing her approach to Gulfside. The town hadn't changed much, at least from what she could see. A tangle of bait shops, aging seafood shacks, neon bars that flickered against the humid twilight. The rental cottage was still there too. Cottage 7. Faded green paint peeling in strips, deck boards warped, curtains drawn. It was privately owned now, rented only sparingly, but locals still called it the Colton House. Abby parked and cut the engine. For a moment, she just sat there, listening to the ocean beyond the dunes. It sounded exactly the same. That was the unsettling part. How the sea could stay constant while everything else changed. A voice startled her. "You're Weaver's girl, aren't you?" She turned to see a man leaning on the hood of an old Ford truck. Mid-60s, broad shoulders, face seamed with sun and salt. Sheriff Bill Hammond. He'd been deputy back in '96, one of the first to walk through the locked sliding door. "Abby," she said, stepping out of her car. He nodded, studying her with wary eyes. "Back to stir ghosts?" "I'm writing," she said carefully. "About what happened here." His expression tightened. "Then you'd best understand." Not everyone wants that story dug up. Some folks here learn to live with silence. You come kicking at it, you might not like what crawls out. Abby met his gaze. Sheriff, I watched my friends disappear from the world without a trace. Silence isn't good enough anymore. For a moment, only the crash of waves filled the distance between them. Then Hammond sighed, pushing off the truck. You want to start? He asked. I'll tell you how it looked the morning we found nothing. Sheriff Bill Hammond's memory was sharp. Sharpened perhaps by the kind of guilt that never dulled. He leaned against the rail of Cottage 7's weathered porch as Abby switched on her recorder, the red light glowing between them. You want the morning? He asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Yes, as much detail as you can. He nodded slowly. All right then. July 14th, 1996. Rental cleaner calls us at 8:15. Says the house is locked. Family's car still out front. But no answer. I was deputy then. Sheriff at the time was Alan Burrows, but he was upstate that weekend. So it was me and 2 uniforms who rolled in first. Abby glanced at the sliding door. The glass was clouded with age, but she could still imagine the scene. Sunlight slanting across the deck, the faint smell of salt and mildew. We punched in the rental code and stepped inside. First impression? Normal. Family normal. Kitchen counter had a half-drunk pot of coffee, a cereal box open, spoons still in the bowls. TV remote on the couch arm. Nothing broken, nothing scattered. And quiet. He rubbed a hand across his weathered jaw. The kind of quiet that doesn't belong in a place where kids slept the night before. Abby scribbled notes, even though her recorder caught every word. No footprints leaving. Not a one, Hammond said. That's what shook us most. Morning tide had rolled in around 6. The sand should have shown tracks if they'd gone walking before that. But from the back deck to the dunes, it was smooth as silk. Like the beach had erased them. Windows? Locked. Everyone. From the inside, Abby felt a prickle of the same unease she remembered from childhood whispers, the idea of a family vanishing into thin air, leaving cereal spoons mid-stir. What did you do next? Called in county. Forensics, what passed for it back then. They dusted, they swabbed, they came up empty. No prints outside the families, no signs of forced entry. Car was untouched. Keys on the counter like Daniel Colton had just set him down. He paused, eyes narrowing at memory. But upstairs, in the kids' room, I noticed something. 2 beds, both unmade. But Peter's pillow, it was damp, like someone had been crying hard into it. The detail clung to the air between them. Abby swallowed. Did you follow any leads? Everyone we could invent, Hammond said grimly. Boats offshore, drifters, jealous patients from Daniel's dental practice, runaway theories, abduction theories, cult theories. Neighbors swore they heard nothing, except one woman 2 cottages down claimed she saw a man standing on the Colton porch at midnight. Said he wore a hat. Couldn't see his face. Abby felt her pulse quicken. A stranger? Or a neighbor, Hammond said. Place was full of rentals. Folks drifted in and out. Nobody kept track. And what about the family themselves? He hesitated. That's where it cut deep. Daniel was solid. Marissa too, but we started hearing whispers about marriage strain. Money troubles. Folks suggested maybe they walked away. Walked away? Abby repeated, her tone edged. From their kids' cereal bowls, from their shoes by the door. That's what I said, Hammond muttered. But 27 years changes how people remember. Some will tell you they knew the Coltons weren't happy. Some will swear they saw bruises, arguments. Truth is, none of us knew what went on inside Abby let silence stretch. The gulls screamed overhead. Finally, Hammond pushed off the railing. I'll tell you what does haunt me. She looked up. That sliding glass door, he said softly. Locked from the inside. That's not how you leave a house. That's how you close a trap. Abby felt the chill run through her. As Hammond walked back toward his truck, She stood staring at the cottage. The sea breeze pressed against the curtains inside, making them ripple faintly as if the house still breathed. For the first time in years, she wondered whether the Coltons had ever left the beach house at all. Abby's notebook was already half filled with Hammond's words, but she knew she couldn't lean on one voice, not even his. Memory was fragile. Stories shifted depending on who told them. To rebuild the Coltons last night, she'd need more voices, the ones that had stayed quiet for decades. She began with the obvious place, the Sand Gull Diner. It had always been Gulfside's center of gossip, a squat building with peeling turquoise paint, red vinyl booths, and the faint smell of fried shrimp soaked into the walls. The waitress still wore her hair piled high in a messy bun, though now it was streaked with gray. Abby recognized her instantly. "Missy?" she asked cautiously, sliding onto a stool at the counter. The woman turned, squinted, and then her eyes widened. "Well, I'll be. Little Abby Weaver. Haven't seen you since, God, since you were what, high school?" "Something like that." Abby managed to smile. "I'm writing about the Coltons." Missy's smile faltered, but she poured coffee anyway. "Thought that storm had blown itself out years ago." "Not for everyone," Abby said softly. "Not for me." Missy set the mug down with a clink. "What do you want to know?" "Do you remember them?" "Sure. Came in here the night they checked in, Saturday. Ordered burgers, kids got milkshakes. They looked normal, maybe tired from the drive. I remember the little boy dropped his straw, and the dad laughed, said, 'Vacation rules.' 3-second rules extended to 10. Everyone laughed." She hesitated, frowning. "They didn't look like people about to vanish?" "Did you see anyone talking to them? Anyone watching?" Missy shook her head. "Place was crowded. Summer always is." "But," she stopped. "But?" Her eyes flicked to the corner booth by the window. There was a man there that night. Alone. Ate a slice of pie. Never looked up once. Except when the Coltons walked out. Then he followed them with his eyes. All the way to the door, Abby's pen stilled. "Did you recognize him?" "No. Never saw him before. Never after Missy's lips pressed tight. I told police back then. Don't think they ever found him." Abby thanked her, left a tip, and stepped back into the humid night air. The surf boomed in the distance, steady as a drumbeat. A stranger watching the Coltons, shadowing them with his eyes. It was too thin to build on, but it was something. She decided to visit another name that had come up in her research, Frank Dillard. He had been the rental agent in '96, managing all of Windward Lane's cottages. Rumor was he still lived in town, though he'd retired years ago. Frank's house was a weathered bungalow on the edge of the marsh. He opened the door shirtless, belly sagging, eyes watery with drink. When Abby introduced herself and her purpose, he almost slammed the door in her face. "Not interested." "Mr. Dillard, please. You were the last person to hand the Coltons their keys." His hand froze on the door frame. He stared at her, then stepped aside reluctantly. The house smelled of mildew and old liquor. "I gave them the code," he said flatly, sinking into a recliner. "That's all." Family came in late afternoon, signed the forms, smiled polite. "Nothing unusual. You didn't notice anything odd? Anyone hanging around the cottages?" His eyes flicked to hers, then away. "I noticed cops crawling all over my properties for weeks after. Tourists canceling left and right. Do you know how much money I lost that summer?" "It wasn't about money," Abby said sharply. "Everything's about money," he muttered. Then, after a pause, "You want to know the truth? That house should have never been rented. Place always felt wrong. Locks sticking, doors swelling, lights flickering. I used to joke it didn't want tenants." Should have listened. Abby's skin prickled. "Are you saying the house itself?" "I'm saying," he cut in, "that people come to the coast thinking they can leave their problems behind. But this place, it keeps them, holds them in the walls." she left unsettled. It was half-drunken rambling, maybe, but it clung to her as she drove back toward the cottage. The sun had dipped below the horizon, sky bleeding orange into violet. Abby pulled over near the dunes and killed the engine. She needed air. The beach stretched empty, a sheet of silver under the rising moon. She walked toward the water, shoes in hand, letting the surf lap her ankles. Somewhere out there, beyond the black horizon, the Gulf hid its secrets. She thought of Peter's damp pillow, of Missy's stranger in the diner, of Frank's muttering about walls that hold things. And for the first time since she was 14, Abby felt the terrifying possibility settle into her chest. Maybe the Coltons had never left the cottage alive. The Gulfside police station still looked the way it had in Abby's memory. A low brick building with a flag that snapped listlessly in the humid air, the faint smell of diesel from the shrimp boats drifting through the open door. Sheriff Hammond had arranged for her to access parts of the old Colton file. She'd expected resistance, maybe stonewalling. Instead, the box sat waiting for her in a cramped conference room, its lid warped, the cardboard stained with water along the bottom. Inside, reports yellowed with age, Polaroid photographs clipped to incident summaries, witness statements typed on crackling onion skin paper. She slipped on gloves. The past deserved careful hands. The first photos were of the house, kitchen counter, the cereal bowls, spoons still inside, a Monopoly board, dice mid-roll. Upstairs, unmade beds, a stuffed rabbit half hanging off the edge of Peter's mattress. Abby closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that frozen moment. When she opened them, she reached for the incident logs. July 14th, cleaner reports house locked. July 15th, canvas of Windward Lane rentals. Notes of no unusual activity, except for a woman named Agnes Wilcox, who claimed she saw a man in a wide-brimmed hat on the Colton porch. The report dismissed her. Vision impaired, unreliable witness. Abby frowned. Agnes Wilcox. She remembered that name. Agnes had been the eccentric older woman who collected seashells in buckets, who shouted at kids to stay off her stretch of sand. Everyone had laughed at her, called her the town crank. But Abby remembered Agnes clearly, standing barefoot in her floral dress, pointing at the Coltons' cottage and whispering, "He's there at night, watching." She scribbled notes, frustration prickling. The police had brushed Agnes aside because she was strange. Strange didn't mean wrong. Further into the file, Abby found the autopsy reports, blank. No bodies, no autopsies, just a line stating, "Presumed abduction." Status, missing persons. She flipped through until she found the neighbor interviews. One caught her attention. A couple in Cottage 5, staying with their teenage son, reported waking around 2 a.m. to what they thought was thunder. Later, they weren't sure, said it might have been a door slamming. The officer's note read, "Coastal storms common." Possibly wind. Abby clenched her pen. Convenient dismissal. Then came the interview with Missy from the diner. She had mentioned the lone man at the booth, but here in the transcript, the officer wrote only, "Patrons described family as cheerful." No suspicious persons noted, no mention of the man. Abby sat back, pulse racing. The inconsistencies weren't subtle, they were glaring. Either sloppy police work or deliberate omission. The door creaked open. Hammond stepped in, carrying 2 styrofoam cups. "Thought you might need coffee." "Thank you," Abby said, voice tight. "But Sheriff, did anyone actually want to solve this case?" He blinked at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" She pushed the transcript toward him. "Missy told me she reported a man in the diner. It's not here. Agnes Wilcox said she saw someone on the porch, labeled unreliable. Another couple reported a slam in the night, dismissed as weather. How many details had to be ignored before this whole thing was stamped unsolvable?" Hammond's jaw tightened. "You weren't there. You don't know the pressure. Then tell me." He set his cup down, sat heavily. Tourist town, summer season. 4 people vanish in a locked house, and suddenly every rental's empty. Restaurants closing, livelihoods gone. County was breathing down our necks, telling us to keep panic down. Burroughs, the sheriff then, made the call. We worked the case, but we didn't amplify it. Didn't chase every shadow, because shadows make headlines. So you let it fade, Abby whispered. He didn't answer. Her anger flared, but underneath it, grief tugged. Kayla had been her best friend, her partner in whispered beach walks and stolen sodas. Abby remembered the girls' bracelets, cheap plastic ones that clicked on her wrist as they played in the sand. She remembered promising, "We'll always find each other, no matter what." But she hadn't. Abby shut the file box, forcing the memory down. "I want to see Agnes," she said finally. Hammond looked startled. "Agnes Wilcox?" "She's still alive, but—" He shook his head. "She's not well." "Where does she live?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Old trailer park by the causeway. You'll smell it before you see it. Just don't expect much." "She talks in circles. I'll take circles over silence," Abby said, rising. As she carried her notes out of the station, the evening sun bled across the horizon. The case file weighed heavy in her arms, but heavier still was the realization forming inside her. Someone had buried the truth about the Coltons, and if the town had helped shovel sand over it, then digging it up would mean more than stirring ghosts. It might mean exposing the living. The trailer park lay just past the causeway, tucked between salt marsh and scrub grass. Rusted trailers slumped in crooked rows, their aluminum skins pocked with corrosion. A few had flower pots on their steps, attempts at cheer against the smell of brine and rot. Abby eased her car onto the gravel, dust pluming behind her. Kids on battered bikes paused to stare, their eyes sharp with suspicion before vanishing around a corner. Agnes Wilcox's place was easy to find, the one with strings of seashells dangling from the eaves, clacking in the humid wind. A faded sign nailed to the door read, "Keep out, God is watching." Abby climbed the steps and knocked. The door opened just wide enough for one pale blue eye to peer out. "Who are you?" "My name is Abby Weaver. I'm writing about the Coltons. People told me you might know something." The eye blinked, suspicious and quick. "Journalists always come too late." "I grew up here," Abby said quietly. "I was Kayla's friend." The door creaked wider. Agnes Wilcox stood in the shadows, wiry frame wrapped in a faded nightgown, her gray hair wild. Her face was lined but alert, sharper than Abby expected. "You'd better come in," Agnes said, "before the gulls tell them you're here." Inside smelled of seawater and mildew. Newspapers were stacked waist-high, covering every surface. Seashells lined the windowsills, arranged in strange patterns. A portable fan hummed in the corner. Agnes sank into a chair, gesturing for Abby to sit on a crate. Her eyes darted constantly toward the window. "You were the only one who said you saw someone that night," Abby began gently. "On the Coltons' porch." Agnes's lips pressed tight. "I saw him more than once." "Who was he?" "A man in a hat. Wide-brimmed, like a fisherman's. He came at night, always after midnight. Stood on their porch. Sometimes he'd press his hand against the glass, like he was testing it." Abby shivered. "Did he go inside?" Agnes nodded slowly. "The last night he went in." Abby's pen scratched frantically. "You're sure?" "I watched from my window. Everyone laughed at me, said I was crazy, but I know what I saw. He went in. And when he left, he wasn't alone." The words hung in the air. Abby leaned forward. "Who was with him?" Agnes's gaze darted to the shells on the sill, then back. "The little boy?" "Peter, his hand in the man's hand, quiet as a shadow." Abby's pulse hammered. "And Kayla, the parents?" Agnes shook her head. "Never saw them again." Just that man, and the boy. Abby struggled to steady her breathing. Why didn't the police believe you? Because I collect shells. Because I shout at children. Because I know gulls talk. Agnes's voice cracked. They called me unreliable. But I know he took the boy. For a moment, Abby saw not madness but grief etched in Agnes's face, raw and unhealed. She swallowed. Do you know where they went? Agnes's eyes grew distant. Sometimes I hear him still, at night when the tide's high. A man whistling, low and flat, the same tune, over and over, and I think he's calling someone. Abby felt her skin crawl. What tune? Agnes hummed, halting, a simple rising and falling pattern, childlike, almost a lullaby. Abby recorded it, heart racing. Suddenly Agnes grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. They'll come for you if you dig too deep. Same as they came for them, Abby tried to steady her voice. Who, Agnes? Who will come? Agnes's eyes bored into hers. The ones who keep the locks. The phrase chilled Abby more than the gulls screaming outside. She thanked Agnes and left, though her hands shook on the wheel as she pulled away. The sky had darkened, storm clouds boiling offshore. Abby replayed the recording of the hummed tune over and over until it burrowed into her mind. A man in a hat, a hand against the glass, a boy led away in silence, and a phrase that sounded less like madness, more like a warning. The ones who keep the locks. The storm broke just before dawn. Abby lay awake in her motel bed, the ceiling flashing with each strike of lightning, rain pelting against the glass. She had left her recorder running, replaying Agnes's tune again and again until it threaded itself through her dreams. A man in a hat, a boy's hand in his, the ones who keep the locks. By the time the storm drifted inland, Abby sat at the small desk, her laptop open. The motel's Wi-Fi sputtered but held. She typed into the search bar, Gulf disappearances wide-brimmed hat. It was a long shot. But in true crime, patterns lived in the margins. Within an hour, she had half a dozen local news clippings from the 1980s and 90s. A missing girl in Corpus Christi, last seen near a boardwalk arcade, a woman in Port Aransas, vanished on her walk home from work, and a fisherman in Galveston who swore he'd seen a man in a hat standing by the pier at midnight, whistling. Her pulse quickened. The descriptions varied, sometimes a straw hat, sometimes felt, always wide-brimmed, always at night. She cross-referenced the dates. 3 of the disappearances clustered within the summer of '94, another in '96. The Coltons. It could be coincidence. Coastal towns were full of drifters, hats, shadows. But something in Agnes's certainty, in her trembling voice, gnawed at Abby. She closed her eyes and remembered Kayla. 11 years old, hair always tangled from the wind, bracelets jangling as she leaned close to whisper secrets. If we ever get lost, we'll leave signs. We'll find each other again. Kayla had said it one evening as they built sand castles, their mothers watching from folding chairs. Abby remembered laughing, carving clumsy arrows into the sand with a stick, pointing toward the dunes. Now, decades later, the memory stabbed her. What if Kayla had tried to leave a sign that night? What if no one had looked hard enough? Abby shoved back from the desk, unable to sit still. She drove through streets still slick with rain, toward the library. The Gulfside Public Library smelled of damp carpet and old paper. The librarian, a quiet man with a hearing aid, barely looked up as Abby spread clippings across a table. She scanned the microfilm machine, scrolling through reels of local papers from 1996. There, on page 6 of the Coastal Times, she found it. A small column headlined, Unconfirmed Report. Strangers sighted near cottages. The description was vague. A tall man in a broad hat. It mentioned Agnes by name, then undercut her testimony with quotes from neighbors calling her eccentric. Abby's throat tightened. Agnes had been telling the truth, and they'd buried her under ridicule. She copied the article, slid it into her folder. As she packed up, the librarian shuffled over, his eyes flicking toward her stack. "Researching the Coltons?" "Yes," Abby said carefully. He hesitated. "I remember that night. My brother was on the volunteer search party. They combed the dunes for hours, found nothing. But he told me later." He lowered his voice. "He swore he heard whistling. Faint, over the wind." Abby's skin prickled. "What kind of whistling?" "A tune," the man said, childlike. Up and down, like a lullaby, the same one Agnes had hummed. Abby left the library shaken. It wasn't just Agnes. Others had heard it too. She drove toward the cottage, needing to see it in daylight. The sky had cleared, the sea a glittering sheet of turquoise. She stood on the porch, recorder in her pocket, staring through the glass at the empty interior. For a moment she thought she heard it, faint, almost lost in the crash of waves. A low whistle, rising and falling. Her breath caught. She spun, but the beach lay empty. Only gulls wheeled above. Her rational mind screamed a coincidence. The other voice, the one shaped by Kayla's laughter and absence, whispered that something older, darker, had lingered here all along. Abby sat on the steps until the sun dipped low, the tide creeping up the sand. She pressed the recorder to her lips, whispering the words Kayla had once told her. "If we ever get lost, we'll leave signs. We'll find each other again." The recorder blinked red. The wind swallowed her voice, and the ocean kept its secrets. The tip came from the librarian, slipped into Abby's hand on her way out. A name scrawled on a yellowed scrap of paper. "Jonas Bell, docks at Miller's Pier. Ask about the Hatman." The name had the weight of a warning, not a suggestion. Miller's Pier jutted crooked into the Gulf, its planks warped, its pilings thick with barnacles. By late afternoon the boats had returned, gulls screaming overhead as fishermen hauled coolers of shrimp and snapper onto the dock. Jonas Bell stood apart from the others, his back to the crowd. He was a wiry man in his 70s, skin seamed like driftwood, hair white under a salt-stained cap. His boat, if it could still be called that, was a weather-beaten skiff with peeling paint and nets piled like a nest. Abby approached cautiously. "Mr. Bell?" He turned, eyes pale blue and startlingly clear. They flicked over her notebook, her recorder, her posture, and he gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're the one chasing ghosts." "I'm chasing answers," Abby said. "Same thing," he muttered, but he didn't walk away. "I was told you might know something about a man in a hat. Seen near the cottages in '96, maybe before." Jonas studied her for a long moment. Then he motioned to the skiff. "Get in." The boat smelled of brine and old rope. Jonas pushed off with one sure motion, and the skiff drifted into the choppy water. The pier fell behind until it was just a line against the horizon. Abby gripped the bench, unsettled. "Why out here?" "Because gulls don't listen at sea," Jonas said. He pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, and wiped his mouth. "You want to know about the Hatman?" Folks make jokes, call it a story told to scare children. But stories come from somewhere. Abby steadied her recorder between them. "Where does this one come from?" Jonas's eyes fixed on the horizon. "First time I heard him was '72. I was a deckhand, running nets at midnight, heard whistling through the fog. Thought it was another boat. But when the fog cleared, nothing. Just a man standing knee-deep in the surf, hat shadowing his face." Watching, a chill slid through Abby. "What did you do?" "I pulled anchor and got the hell out. Next day, girl was missing from a motel 2 miles downshore. Did you tell anyone?" Jonas barked a laugh. "Fishermen don't tell police stories about shadows. They laugh you off, say you've been drinking." So I kept my mouth shut. Abby leaned forward. But you kept seeing him. Jonas's jaw clenched. Off and on. Always at night. Always whistling. I'd see him on beaches, piers, even once out at sea. And every time someone disappeared soon after Abby's pulse quickened. Who is he? A drifter. A predator. Jonas shook his head. He's not just a man. Or if he was once, he isn't now. He doesn't age, doesn't change. Always the same hat, the same shadowed face. You think Agnes Wilcox was crazy? She wasn't. She saw him too. That's why she never left her window. The skiff rocked, the gulf swelling beneath them. Abby gripped the bench tighter. I saw him near Windward Lane the week the Coltons vanished, Jonas said quietly. Midnight, standing at the edge of the dunes, whistling. I knew what it meant, but I didn't warn them. Didn't want to be laughed at again. And then, they were gone. His voice cracked. I carry that. The only sound was the slap of waves against the hull. Abby's recorder blinked red, capturing every word, but she felt as if she were sliding into a place beyond journalism, into myth, into nightmare. Jonas leaned closer, his eyes fierce. If you're digging into this, you'd better understand something. He doesn't just take people. He takes them through locks. Doors that shut from the inside, windows that don't open, places that should keep you safe. That's how you know it's him. Abby's skin prickled. The ones who keep the locks. She whispered, Why? Jonas looked away. Maybe he's a man who learned how to slip through cracks. Maybe he's something older, something the sea spits up when it's hungry. Doesn't matter. What matters is he doesn't stop. You don't catch him. You just pray he doesn't notice you. The horizon had gone blood red with sunset. Jonas turned the skiff back toward shore, his silence final. Abby stared into the darkening water, her mind a storm of questions. The man in the hat wasn't just a figure in Agnes's imagination. Others had seen him, others had heard the whistle. And if Jonas was right, the Coltons' locked house hadn't been protection at all. It had been the perfect doorway. July 13th, 1996. The Coltons' last evening. The house glowed with lamplight against the rising dark, its windows rectangles of gold in the salt, heavy air. Inside, laughter mingled with the crash of waves. Linda Colton stood at the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti, her hair frizzed from humidity. She hummed under her breath, pleased to see her children sprawled on the rug in the living room. Kayla, bracelets clattering on her wrist, was pressing paper money into Peter's hand. They were halfway through a Monopoly game, the board crooked, dice skittering dangerously close to the floorboards. David Colton leaned against the door frame, beer in hand, his shirt damp from the day's fishing excursion. He looked tired, but content. This was why they'd rented the beach house, to step away from the grind of Houston, to watch their children be children a little longer. "Dinner in 10, Linda called. "Kayla's cheating," Peter said with mock outrage. "Am not." Kayla's grin was wide, full of a missing tooth charm. "I'm just winning." David chuckled and ruffled her hair as he passed. "That's my girl." Outside, the last sun bled into the horizon. The dunes loomed as silhouettes, grasses bowing in the onshore wind. Somewhere, faint and nearly lost beneath the surf, a whistle threaded the night. Neither Linda nor David noticed it at first. But Peter paused, dice in hand. "Mom?" he asked. "Who's that whistling?" Linda frowned, spoon in midair. "I don't hear anything, honey." But Peter did. He turned toward the window, his small face intent, as though the tune belonged to him alone. Later, after dinner, the family gathered on the porch. The air was thick with heat, lightning bugs blinking in the scrub. David smoked. Linda sipped a glass of wine. Kayla leaned against the railing, whispering with Peter about what they'd do tomorrow. Swim until their fingers wrinkled, collect shells, maybe convince Dad to rent kayaks. When the children were finally ushered to bed, Linda switched on the porch light. The beam cast a pale cone into the sand. For a moment, a shape flickered at the edge of it. Tall. Still. A hat brim wide enough to hide a face. Linda blinked, and it was gone. She shook her head, telling herself it was just a shadow, a trick of light. Upstairs, Peter whispered to Kayla. I heard it again. The whistling? He nodded. Kayla pulled the blanket higher. Don't tell Mom. She'll say you imagined it. I didn't. Then it's just somebody on the beach, Kayla said, though she shivered. We're safe inside. It's locked. She reached for his hand under the covers, their fingers twining. Downstairs, David locked the front door. Click. The sound echoed too loud in the still house. The night deepened. Waves boomed. The whistle came again, closer now, weaving through the rush of surf and wind. A lullaby of rising and falling notes, simple, insistent. Kayla dreamed of sandcastles and arrows carved in the tide. Peter dreamed of footsteps in the hallway. At 2:13 a.m., a door clicked open. The Monopoly board lay on the rug where they had left it, dice frozen mid-roll. The pot of spaghetti sat crusted on the stove, and by sunrise, the beach house was silent, locked from the inside. Abby laid the photocopies across the sheriff's desk like cards in a losing hand. The clipping from 1996 naming Agnes Wilcox, the Corpus Christi disappearance. The whistled lullaby transcribed in her notebook. Her recorder, its light blinking red, ready to play Jonas Bell's gravelly voice describing a man who slipped through locked doors. Sheriff Hammond rubbed his temples as though she'd dumped salt into an open wound. Jesus, Weaver. It's not Jesus, Abby snapped. It's a man in a hat. And people have been whispering about him for decades while your department let it rot in a file box. He shot her a glare, but she saw the flicker of shame behind it. You think I don't know he dropped the ball? Half the men on that case are dead now. Burroughs had a heart attack 10 years ago. Others retired. It's me left holding the bag, and you want me to chase shadows at my age? They're not shadows. They're patterns. She pushed the notes closer. Agnes saw him. Jonas saw him. A librarian's brother heard the whistle. And your own files confirm unconfirmed sightings. You tell me that's nothing. Hammond's chair creaked as he leaned back. His badge gleamed dully under the fluorescent light, but the man himself looked older than he had in the diner. His skin sagged, eyes ringed with fatigue. I used to think Agnes was crazy, he admitted, but if you line up everything you've got, maybe she wasn't. Maybe Jonas wasn't either. Maybe we all just didn't want to see it. Abby's pen tapped against her notebook. Then let's see it now. Reopen the case officially. Interview people again. Dig through those old leads with fresh eyes. You owe the Coltons that much. The sheriff's silence stretched. Finally, he exhaled, long and slow. You don't understand what you're asking. This town survived that summer by forgetting. People built businesses, raised kids, buried their fear. You dig all this up, you'll rip scabs off wounds that never healed. And if there's something real behind it... His voice trailed off. Abby leaned forward. If there's something real, then ignoring it means more families like the Coltons. Is that what you want on your conscience? His jaw tightened. Look, she said softer. I was 11 when Kayla disappeared. She was my best friend. Every night for years I thought she might come back, that maybe she'd knock on my window. I grew up on that hope, Sheriff. And I'm telling you, this isn't just about the past. It's about now. For the first time. Hammond's gaze softened, like he saw the child behind the journalist. He rubbed his chin. What do you want from me? Access, Abby said without hesitation. Full access to your archives, any evidence still in storage, and cooperation. If I find something, you back me up. Hammond shook his head slowly. You don't know how dangerous this could be. I'm already in it, Abby said. Too deep to stop now. He studied her, then finally reached for his keys. He unlocked a drawer, pulled out a battered metal file box, and slid it across the desk. Unofficially, I never gave you this. Inside's what we pulled from the house. Photos, fingerprints, things that didn't make it into the reports. Abby's breath caught. She opened the lid. Inside lay envelopes brittle with age. Polaroids of the Monopoly board, the spaghetti pot, the locked door. Fingerprint cards. And at the bottom, a plastic evidence bag containing something Abby hadn't expected. A scrap of cloth, blue, with a white trim. Her throat tightened. This was found under the sofa, Hammond said. We assumed it was Kayla's. She was always carrying little purses, wasn't she? Abby's chest constricted. She remembered the bag, remembered Kayla showing it off on the beach. This is it. She called it her lucky bag. She never went anywhere without it. Hammond looked weary. We tested it. No blood, no hair, nothing. Just fabric. But it proves she was in that room, Abby whispered. He gave her a pointed look. Nobody doubted that. She slipped the photograph of the bag into her folder, pulse hammering. First the cottage, then Reed Carraway's office, and now this. The bag, or its twin, kept circling back like a signal. She stood, her voice steadier than she felt. Then we start with the bag. Hammond frowned. Start what? Finding out how it moved from that locked house to Reed Carraway's shelf 24 years later. The sheriff didn't answer, but Abby saw in his eyes that the question rattled him as much as it rattled her. The junkyard looked different in daylight. Less sinister, more mundane. Rows of rusted frames, grease-streaked mechanics in coveralls, the smell of oil and hot metal. But Abby's stomach still knotted as she pulled through the gates. Dean Lom, the owner, was behind the counter again. He brightened when he saw her. Back so soon? Didn't scare you off the first time, huh? I'm looking for Reed Carraway, Abby said. Dean's smile faltered. Reed's off today. Why? I'd like to ask him some questions. About an item I believe was in his office. She kept her voice neutral. Dean scratched the back of his neck. Reed's private. Doesn't like strangers poking around. What kind of item? Abby laid her recorder on the counter, its light blinking. A blue handbag. Child-sized. Found on his shelf. Ring any bells? Dean's eyes widened just slightly before he masked it with a shrug. Lots of junk in that office. Could have been his daughter's. Reed doesn't have a daughter, Abby said calmly. Dean looked caught, then recovered. Maybe a niece. I don't keep track of his family. Abby leaned closer. Then tell me about his family. Dean shifted, uncomfortable. He grew up around here. His old man worked docks, odd jobs. Mom left early. Not much else, Abby pressed. And his uncle? Charlie Carnes? Dean's expression froze. The name had landed like a stone dropped in still water. Where'd you hear that? Abby didn't answer. Dean glanced around as if the walls might be listening. His voice dropped. That's nothing to do with Reed. You're barking up the wrong tree. Then why did Agnes Wilcox say the Coltons were taken by the ones who keep the locks? Why did Jonas Bell swear he saw a man in a hat at the dunes that same week? And why does Kayla Colton's handbag keep turning up in Reed's possession? Her voice sharpened. That's not coincidence, Mr. Lom. That's connection. Dean's jaw worked. Finally, he muttered, Reed's uncle was trouble. Everyone knew it. Big man, mean streak, always drifting from town to town. People said he lived off women. Odd jobs. Folks whispered he was dangerous. But nobody ever proved anything. Where is he now? Dean shook his head. Haven't seen him in years. Some say he died. Others say he's still around, just knows how to vanish. Reed doesn't talk about him. Does Reed wear hats? Abby asked. Dean blinked at her. Sometimes. Ball caps, fishing hats. What's that got to do with anything? Abby didn't answer. She gathered her folder, recorder still blinking, and walked back toward her car. Halfway across the lot, she noticed a figure watching her from the far edge of the yard. Reed Carraway. He leaned against a stack of crushed cars, arms crossed, expression unreadable. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. Abby froze. The air seemed to thicken. Then Reed tipped the brim in a mock salute, turned, and disappeared into the maze of wreckage. Her recorder caught only the faintest sound over the hum of machinery. A low, rising whistle. The same tune Agnes had hummed. The same tune Jonas had heard through fog. Abby's heart pounded. The man in the hat wasn't just a story. He was flesh and blood. And he had noticed her. Abby left the junkyard with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She told herself not to look back, but in the mirror, she swore she saw movement near the rusted heaps. A figure lingering at the edge of the lot, a shadow in a wide hat. She pressed harder on the gas. Back at the motel, she spread her notes across the bed like protective charms. Agnes's testimony, Jonas's story, the sheriff's evidence box. In the center, she placed the photograph of the handbag. The one Hammond had said came from under the sofa, but she couldn't stop seeing Reed tipping his hat, that faint whistle bleeding through the noise of machinery. The door rattled suddenly. Abby jerked upright, heart hammering. A knock followed, slow and deliberate. She crossed the room on shaking legs. "Who is it?" "Housekeeping," a woman's voice replied. Abby peered through the peephole. A maid in uniform, holding a stack of towels. She exhaled in shaky relief, opened the door, and took them with a muttered thanks. But when she turned back, a folded slip of paper lay on the carpet just inside the threshold. She hadn't seen the woman drop it. Her throat dried as she picked it up. 6 words, scrawled in uneven block letters. "You're looking in the wrong place. No signature, no explanation." She checked the parking lot from the window, empty except for her car and a few others. The maid was gone. Her pulse thundered. Someone had been in her room long enough to leave this. Someone close enough to know what she was doing. By evening, she couldn't stay still. She drove the coastline, eyes darting to every dune and boardwalk, half expecting to glimpse him. Hat brim, shadowed face, whistling low. Every silhouette became him. Every stretch of beach seemed to echo with the tune Agnes had hummed. When darkness fell, she returned to Windward Lane. The Coltons' cottage loomed at the end of the road, pale in the moonlight, shutters sealed like a closed eye. She parked, left the engine idling, and stared. That was when she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the dunes, facing the house. Tall, still, a hat brim wide enough to hide a face. Her hand fumbled for the recorder. She pressed it to the glass, whispering, "I see him. He's here." The figure didn't move, but faintly, carried on the wind, the whistle began, low, rising, falling. The same lullaby. Abby's skin crawled. She forced herself to blink, to look away for just a second. When she looked back, the dunes were empty. Gone. The cottage, locked and silent, seemed to exhale. Abby stayed until the whistle faded from her ears, until only the crash of waves remained. Then she drove back, shaken, recorder still blinking red. For the first time since she had started digging, she wasn't sure if she was documenting the truth, or being pulled into the same nightmare that had swallowed the Coltons. The storm rolled back in just before midnight. Thunder cracked over Gulfside, and the waves churned white against the pilings of Windward Lane. Abby sat in her car at the edge of the road, headlights off, recorder balanced in her palm. "This is Abby Weaver," she whispered, voice trembling. "July 13th, 2020. 24 years since the Coltons vanished from this house. I'm going inside." The cottage loomed, shutters closed, pale paint streaked with salt. The police tape had long since rotted away. Only the heavy padlock on the front door remained, scarred with rust. Her keychain clicked. Hammond's file box had contained an old duplicate, marked evidence only. She hadn't asked permission. She couldn't. The key turned with a groan. The door opened onto stale air. She stepped inside. The living room looked frozen in time. The Monopoly board still lay on the rug, dice mid-roll. The pot on the stove, now crusted into rust, sat where Linda Colton had left it. Dust lay heavy over everything, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for 2 decades. Abby whispered into her recorder. The interior is preserved. Nothing touched. Her flashlight beam skimmed the sofa, the kitchen counter, the staircase. Every creak of the floorboards seemed magnified. Upstairs, the children's room waited. She paused at the threshold. 2 twin beds, one with blankets still twisted, as if a child had risen in the night. Her throat closed. Kayla's hairbrush sat on the dresser, brittle strands still caught in its teeth. She crossed to the window. Locked. She tested the frame, stuck tight. Every window in the house was the same, Hammond had told her, sealed from the inside. So how had the Coltons vanished? Behind her, the whistle began, soft rising and falling. Abby spun, flashlight jerking across the empty room. Nothing, only her own breath rasping in her throat. She gripped the recorder. The whistle is inside. Downstairs, a door slammed, her blood iced. She crept to the landing, heart pounding. The living room lay in darkness, but in the beam of her flashlight, a figure stood by the front door. Tall, still, a hat brim wide enough to hide a face. Reed, or the Hatman. "Who are you?" Abby demanded, though her voice broke. The figure didn't move. The whistle continued, low and endless, filling the house. Abby raised the recorder. Why the Coltons? Why the locked doors? For a heartbeat, silence. Then a voice, not loud, not soft, but flat, as if spoken from a great distance. "Locks are invitations." Abby's skin prickled. "Where are they?" she whispered. The figure tilted its head. "Behind the walls." Always behind the walls. She dared a step closer, flashlight trembling. "Kayla Colton was my friend. Where is she?" The whistle cut off. The figure lifted a hand, pointing toward the staircase wall. Abby swung the beam. The paneling looked ordinary, pale wood, warped with age. But one section bore faint scratches, like fingernails. She crossed the room in a daze, pressed her hand to the panel. It shifted, a hidden seam. Her breath caught. She shoved, and the panel creaked open onto darkness. A narrow space between the walls, stale air rushing out. Inside, shelves lined with objects. A child's shoe, a broken watch, toys, trinkets, relics of lives interrupted. And in the center, a small blue handbag, its clasp tarnished, white trim smudged with dust. Abby's knees buckled. Kayla's. Her hand shook as she reached for it. Behind her, the whistle resumed. Louder now. Close. She spun, but the figure was gone. Only the front door stood ajar, rain blowing in. Abby clutched the handbag to her chest, recorder still blinking. The cottage creaked, sighed, as if settling back into silence. She whispered into the recorder, her voice breaking. Found it. Evidence hidden in wall. Objects from other victims. The Coltons, they didn't leave. They were taken. Through the locks, thunder cracked overhead. She fled the house, rain lashing her face, the whistle echoing in her ears long after she slammed the car door shut. When she looked back, the cottage windows glowed faintly, as if someone inside had lit the lamps again. Watching. The news broke the next morning. Cold case evidence found in Windward Lane Cottage scrolled across local broadcasts. Reporters gathered outside the police station, cameras flashing as Sheriff Hammond gave his first statement in years about the Colton disappearance. In a previously concealed compartment, he read stiffly, investigators recovered personal belongings believed to be associated with the Colton family and possibly other missing persons. The discovery reopens the 1996 case. We ask anyone with information to come forward. He did not mention the whistle. He did not mention the man in the hat. Abby watched from the motel, Kayla's handbag resting on the bed beside her. The officers had taken it for evidence, but she had photographed it, every angle, every thread. Her recorder sat on the nightstand, its light dark now. She had replayed the voice over and over. Locks are invitations. The words had come from nowhere and everywhere at once, caught in her microphone, seared into her ears. She had handed it to Hammond, watched his face pale as he listened. He didn't deny it, but he didn't acknowledge it either. By evening, the media had already spun the story into a triumph. Breakthrough after 24 years. Closure for grieving family. Sheriff praised for persistence. But Abby knew it wasn't closure. The handbags, toys, trinkets in that wall were not accidents. They were trophies. And the figure in the doorway, the shadow in the hat. He hadn't been caught. He had simply stepped aside, letting her glimpse what he wanted her to see. That night, unable to sleep, Abby drove to the beach. The storm had passed, leaving the sand damp and the sky washed clean. She sat at the edge of the surf, recorder in her lap, handbag photo clutched in her hand. She whispered, "Kayla, I found it. I found you." The waves answered, rolling dark and endless. For a long time, she sat in silence, until she heard it again, faint, threading through the roar of the water, so low she might have imagined it. The whistle. The same lullaby, carried by the wind, rising and falling, endless. Abby gripped the recorder, her pulse quickening. She could run. She could leave Gulfside forever, bury her notes, bury the sound. Or she could follow it. The tune drifted down shore, toward the line of darkened cottages. One by one, their shutters opened in the breeze, as though unseen hands had turned the locks.